We'll now introduce Alsharq REISE, the company we work for, and then we will speak a little bit about how it is working as a tour operator in authoritarian regimes, and what are the challenges and how do we overcome these challenges. And then in the end, we will talk about two examples, concrete examples, Myanmar and Iran. And then we have time to discuss and also for you to ask questions. So before I start, I would like to hand over to Christoph so you can introduce yourself.
Good day, everyone. My name is Christoph. I am a co-founder of Alsharq REISE, a project that started as a journalist blog and nowadays is mainly a travel agency, but also does other things. We will come to that later. I'm a political scientist and studied as well Middle Eastern studies and history. Worked for many years in mainly Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, and now I'm back in Berlin, kind of running this this project along with Johanna and others.
Thank you, Christoph. And I work as a project manager at Alsharq REISE, doing many different things. Lately, also working a lot with tour operators in creating online formats and virtual tours, since we all know it has been a bit tricky to travel during the pandemic. Before working at Alsharq REISE, I lived and worked in Myanmar's former capital, Yangon, together with Barbara and Angelo, who I both see here, which is really nice. And there I have been coordinating a project that was supporting the sustainable development of value chains of tourism SMEs in Myanmar. I would just start and just talk a little bit about Alsharq. As you know, now we are doing political study trips, or we're organizing political study trips, and we're focusing on West Asia and Northern Africa. And so you can already see Myanmar is a little bit of an exception there. But yeah, this is basically how it started. And also, we not only doing these political study trips, but we also started to do digital travel and other educational formats. We can come to this a little bit later, but I don't want to put a focus on this today, obviously. And also we now doing technical support for digital and hybrid events. Also, I don't want to put a focus on this today. Yeah, but basically just to give you an idea on what Alsharq is doing. Then I would just go to the next slide. Here we go, and we hear a bit from Christoph about the background of Alsharq and the project.
Thank you, Johanna. So Alsharq is not a very typical travel agency, because it started as a journalist enterprise. Like at the time, we were actually students, the three of us. In 2005, we founded a blog called, an online magazine called Alsharq, because at that time we had the impression that news, especially from Western Asia, like from Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and so on, were either not brought to a broader German public, or broadcasted from a very Eurocentrist perspective, like always with the question, what does this mean to Europe? And what does this mean to Europe's security? And last but not least, we were kind of critical of a lot of stereotypes that were reproduced in the way German-speaking media was dealing with the region we were especially interested in, and in which we were also living at that time. And so we started with writing about the region, and at some point we came to the conclusion that with journalist coverage we reach a certain kind of people, but most or other people need like the direct experience, being confronted with political and social realities in a country. And that's what we did from 2010 on, and that was when Alsharq Travels was founded. And we started with our core region, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. We're supposed to have a Syria trip in 2011, and you all know what happened in 2011 in Syria, so we couldn't do that, but expanded and expanded and expanded all the way to Myanmar nowadays. And the idea is to really impart social and political realities of local communities on site. And let's come to the next slide. And here you have a brief geographic overview where we are offering trips. So that's North Africa with Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan 2022 for the first time. And that's the Levant mainly, so Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, but also nowadays to southeastern European countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania to come, Turkey, and countries such as Iraq, Iran, Oman, Uzbekistan, so Central Asia as well, Pakistan to come up in 2022, and Myanmar. So that's around 40 physical trips a year and around 15 countries. We do more on a digital basis, countries we can't access physically, such as Afghanistan or Syria, to give you examples. We are like 6 full staff members and another around 25 tour guides, some of them being local, some of them being from Germany. And as I said, the focus is on the WANA region, which we termed this region in order not to fall into the trap again of Eurocentrist perspectives, calling this the Middle East from a German perspective. Johanna, please continue.
Thank you. Here I just put it in because we're so a little bit proud because we just launched a new website for this whole digital project we're working on. If you're interested, have a look later. I just posted the link in the chat, and then we can continue. Yes, and we have now just a few impressions from our travels. Yeah, hand over to you, Christoph.
Yeah. Sometimes images can help to kind of grasp what these tours are about. This is, for example, from Lalesh in northern Iraq, where I'll be traveling, by the way, next week for our first tours again after the pandemic. So Iraqi Kurdistan, this is a holy site of the Yazidi community. The place is called Lalesh, where we always encounter people from the Yazidi community. Our tour guides, you see 2 of them in front, like in front of the picture, are themselves from different Iraqi origins, Kurdish, Shiite, Muslim, Central Iraqi. So it's all about bringing multi perspectives into such a trip. Next image, please. And it's also about like really encountering people. This is at a demonstration in Diyarbakir in the southeast of Turkey, mainly Kurdish populated town, where we demonstrated we didn't demonstrate, we joined a demonstration for the rights of imprisoned people, joining like especially the sisters and mothers of imprisoned people. So our tours do have a very political sphere as well. Next one, please. This is also about politics. For example, this is in Beirut, in Lebanon, just to show you that we also very much focus and speak about public campaigns such as to stop the gentrification of Beirut, as this is, and the privatization of Beirut. Next image, please. But we also, and this is what someone had already kind of mentioned, we also have a leisure parts in our trips. And this is, for example, in Oman, from personally speaking, my paradise, where we do a lot of like really canyoning, hiking, and in wonderful landscapes. And at the bonfire, speak about politics. This is also a way to do this. Next one, please. This is Sudan, nothing to add. This is not nothing to add, but this is very interesting because this is an example of a very recent, quite successful revolution. And we'll travel there in February and see like how now the different parts of society and the different actors of change and the actors of kind of revision are really struggling nowadays to shape the future of the country. So this is also quite exciting and quite typical for our tours to go into places where things are quite dynamic, politically speaking. Just another image to see that we do have a lot of that encounters are so important, and that this example is that one of the tour guides, she's actually from Diyarbakir, a young woman from Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey, and we also visit her families, we visit relatives. We try to create not only official meetings but also meetings with relatives, as I mentioned, or just to enjoy a together party, dancing, whatsoever. So it should be encounters on all levels when we go on tour. That's about religious diversity, the example of a Jewish synagogue in Uzbekistan. Next one, and I think now, Johanna, yes.
Yes, now we're in Myanmar. This is an example of talking to a, oops, I don't know what happened there, talking to a guide who guided us through Yangon. He was talking about yeah, different heritages in Yangon, but I will actually come back to this later again. And yeah, and this is Shwedagon Pagoda. Who has been to Myanmar definitely saw the Shwedagon Pagoda, I guess, in Yangon. The slides are doing, I think, automatically running now. I'm not quite sure why, but okay. Well, we start with our with our input now on the examples of Myanmar and Iran. Basically, Christoph already touched on this a little bit, and this will already, I guess, answer a few questions. What is actually our aim, and what is our philosophy when we do political study trips? And of course, we want to have like a detailed input on politics and the society. So for us, it's very important that we have an exchange on eye level. As you could see, could be little talks in a cafe or bonfire. All different kind of formats basically help to understand the realities of local people better. Another thing is that for us, it's very important that all our tour guides have a regional experience or have a very good knowledge of the local language and surroundings, as well as numerous contacts of political and civil society. So the thing is, we don't travel into any country where there is not a direct contact, basically, or where we travel with a tour guide that has that does not speak the language or yeah, has lived there. So most of the people who guide us or who are in our team have either lived there or often have family ties within the country. Another thing that is very important is that we want to convey a differentiated view of our target region. And in doing so, we aim for the participants to question existing opinions and deal with new perspectives as impartially as possible. So we also try to, like, and that brings me to the next point, always question our view, but also our role when we go into a country, when we speak to different kind of entities or people, basically, and also have a critical look on tourism itself, right? I mean, we cannot just say that tourism is just beneficial for everyone. So obviously we have to be very, very careful in how we select our suppliers, and we also come to this a bit later to explain how exactly we're doing this. And then we obviously hope that after we did our trips, that there is an impact from our trips, so that that the knowledge is passed on, that our how do you say, the tourists that were traveling with us gain, for example. Yeah. And then after this, I will come back on how we do this in the example of Myanmar and Iran. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview what are actually our aims. And now over to Christoph.
So for example, we would like again kind of also ask you to what comes into your mind when you pose the question, what are common challenges of working in authoritarian regimes? Anything that kind of pops up in your mind immediately? If that is not the case, we'll let some ideas from our side fly in, please.
Yes.
Here we go. Yeah, so obviously there might be indirect benefits for a regime which is authoritarian, which is maybe also violating human rights on a daily basis, which is not distributing the wealth of the country in a kind of equal way. So that's I think a thing everyone would would think of. But also other challenges, like if we meet someone, on the one hand, that can mean in some context that we protect this person by meeting with us because we are somehow Westerners, officials, whatsoever, privileged persons that somehow can also guarantee for the safety for someone. But in many other instances, we can also put those people at risk the moment we leave the country and are not their safeguards anymore. So we really need to think of the contexts and the environments in which we meet with people who do share critical ideas of the regime. And a very, very direct effect of many authoritarian regimes means that there's a lot of control. Naming the one example from Iran, for example, we need to tell the Ministry of Tourism the exact way we sit in the bus, where any one of these 20 people sit. So there is a kind of very, this is, I think, a very obvious example. And of course, there's also limited freedom of movement. There's some areas which we cannot access. Maybe we can access a certain area, but we would have to be checked for hours beforehand by the regime. Let's come to the next slide. Is that still me, Johanna, or is that you?
It's me. I would just touch on this quickly. So obviously we do our due diligence, and obviously we do know that we have an impact as soon as we start traveling somewhere. But we are definitely a small tour operator with a small number of tours each year with a small team, which comes that we as a team have limited resources and capacity, which brings us to the next slide, that we are basically we rely on our network, and we rely on exchanging with other companies, people, guides, etc. And I think that one slide was you, Christoph.
Okay, thanks. So to give you an example, we wouldn't, like, usually our way is not to say we want to do a tour in Algeria, for example, but I know someone who has been living in Algeria for 7 years and is knowledgeable about the German and the Algerian context, who is knowledgeable about the threats of being active in tourism. So the first focal point is actually an expert on the country and the context. And it's often not experience in tourism, for example. This is something which we can kind of pass on through educational workshops and so on. But really to have someone who knows about the place a lot of things. And so, yeah, and this is also the way how to start, for example, to choose a travel guide. Like in many countries, you're obliged to work with an officially certified travel guide. So if you don't have that experience and knowledge in the place, you won't find a travel guide who is kind of trustworthy and critical of the regime, but at the same time able to know the boundaries in which we should interact with the regime. So this is, I can give you an example of Iran later on. And as Johanna already mentioned, it is obligatory for us for our tour guides to have worked in a country or lived in a country for several years, because only through that you kind of you can sense and you get a feeling for the sensitivities in the particular country. we often get like emails or phone calls by people who say, I would really like to join your team, and I could imagine travel guiding in 5 different countries. And this is always when we need to kind of tell them, actually, you should be an expert before you approach us, otherwise it won't work. This is kind of the dilemma of our concept, because we mainly work in authoritarian or semi-authoritarian areas. And yeah, and often people do have an academic background as well relating to the country, I should add.
Okay, so we come to Myanmar. I would just because I don't know who else has been joining us since the beginning, give you a quick introduction on where Myanmar stands, basically our last trip to Myanmar we did in 2019, November 2019, and there Myanmar was still de facto democracy. And before, Myanmar has been under military rule for various guises and for nearly 50 years. And then the constitution that the Myanmar was working with was drafted by the military in 2008. So you already see it called itself a democracy, but still the military wrote the constitution. The military obviously made sure in that constitution that they still hold a lot of power. They still had and I'm talking about had because, as maybe most of you know, Myanmar had a military coup in 1st of September this year. But back then, the military also hold important ministerial positions like the military Ministry of Defense, Home Affairs and Border. It always had 25% in the parliament, 25% of the seats in the parliament. In order to change a law, you need more than 75%. So you can see that they made very, very sure that you cannot really shake so much about the power they still have. And other challenges we're facing is that, or just an example, basically how they still controlled a lot and also controlled the movement, especially of tourists. Like as a foreign tourist, you're not allowed to stay in any kind of hotel. It has to be a hotel that is especially designed for tourists, that has a certificate that they can welcome international tourists, basically. And there are many more examples, but just to make this a bit clearer. And what are the moral challenges? All of you mentioned a few in the beginning, like we're traveling in a country where it has an authoritarian regime. We're traveling in the country where armed conflicts are happening, where genocide has been happening, or it's happening, and we are supporting the military indirectly with going to Myanmar. So, for example, when we just pay entry for Bagan, for example, which is a very, very big tourism site in Myanmar, the entrance fee I don't know exactly how much percent it was very high percentage, 90 or something like that. Okay, Barbara is nodding, goes to the military. We also decided to see, for example, that there's a drug abuse museum. It's called Drug Abuse Museum in Yangon, which we decided to take our participants to, knowing that we will benefit the military with it. But it was important in order to actually see how is the military doing their propaganda, for example. And this Drug Abuse Museum is a great example for that. And in order to give a broad picture, because that is for us the most important thing. It's not that we want to go to a country and say, and just show our view of what we think is right or wrong. We want to enable the tourist itself to get a broad overview, to speak to many different people. And so there is no real way around it, but what we do is to inform our participants on our tours, and that is the most important thing. And as Christoph said, in the beginning, when they arrive, for example, when they arrive in Myanmar, then the first day they arrive in Yangon, which is the former capital of Myanmar. We take a whole day to give introductions on history and culture and the political system in Myanmar, to make our tourists aware of, for example, what can be risky for other tour guides we meet in Myanmar if they say this and that, if they ask this and that. And so it's for us to protect, of course, our tourists, but also to protect the people we meet, as well as we have huge responsibility if we travel in a country, especially like Myanmar, where tourism just started, to travel also in a sustainable way, or in a responsible way, which means, which is a little side thing, but for us, it's very important that our tourists also understand their own role in a country where tourism was still a new concept, basically, and how they affect, obviously, Myanmar by traveling there. So yeah, I already touched a little bit on this, but of course we've been constantly confronted with questions of, is it morally accepted to travel to a country whose government and military disregard human rights, and what is the added value for the local people we meet? And for us, we think, and that's not only our view, obviously, we also try to discuss this with the people we meet in Myanmar. There is an added value by encounters, by talking about different perspectives, and for us, understanding their perspective, but also it's very important to have this exchange. If we boycott a country, or if we don't go to this country, there's simply no option for locals to have these encounters anymore. And so we think, yeah, boycotting is a very, very wrong way, as well as boycott usually does not really hurt the military as much as people probably would like to think it hurts the military. It usually hurts the small business owners, the family-owned restaurants, the souvenir shops at Bagan, for example, what I explained before. So yeah, we think the way for us is definitely to still travel there, but in a very informed way. And yeah, so, but then again, how do we actually choose our suppliers? And I think I touched on this a little bit already. As we, in a small team, we cannot do it ourselves. We cannot do the whole due diligence ourselves, but we have corporations with local NGOs. I put two here, for example. The one is the Myanmar Responsible Tourism Institute. It's a local NGO I also worked at, who created the Myanmar Responsible Tourism Awards, which was an idea to have a criteria of what are actually sustainable businesses in Myanmar, and to give a little bit of an overview which of the tourism businesses here in Myanmar practice sustainable tourism. MCRB is doing a similar thing, not just for tourism businesses, but for businesses in Myanmar as well. But then obviously we also have broader schemes like Travel Life, which has been mentioned before as well, that help us to identify businesses. Also our local network in the country. And again, it's not always easy to see which business is belonging to the military, or how much of this business is going to the military. But also I've been living there for 3 years. My colleague Simon has been living there for 5 years. So you do create, first of all, a little bit of an eye for what is owned and operated by the military and what is a small family-owned business. and when we don't know it, we ask, or we talk to people basically, but always favor responsible and sustainable entities, and also entities that are supporting other projects. So for example, there are a lot of projects in Myanmar, like in Bagan, we went to a restaurant that are supporting trainings for underprivileged youth or adults who usually wouldn't have a chance to get a job, basically. So we always try to support these kind of projects, and through that we also again raise awareness with the tourists we're traveling with, to make them understand what is the status quo for underprivileged youth, for example, in Myanmar. Here I have another example, just an example of what we include in our trip. So since Myanmar has, it's a big country, and it has around or more than 135 ethnic minorities, so we always try to go, not just only stay in the main areas, but to also try to see a lot of different areas in Myanmar. And this one, for example, is in the north. It's a project run by FFI. That's called the lake, or not the project is called, the lake is called Indoji Lake, and it's very closely located to the jade mines in Myanmar. And Myanmar is one of the biggest importer of jade. And so there we, for example, discuss with the locals what are the environmentally problems, what are harmful activities in this area, and what are the solutions, for example. And I just want to, just looking at the time, quickly touch on it. Here's an example of the trip we did in 2019. So as I just mentioned, up in the north, we have Indoji Lake in Machina, in Kachin State. Kachin State, I don't know if you know, is a state where one of the world's longest civil wars has been going on. And here just some impressions basically of Myanmar. Shwedagon Pagoda, this is Golden Rock, this is the parliament we visited, Bagan, and this also in Kachin State, very interesting NGO who also talks about what harmful practices the military has there, and how it is affecting the people who live there. And I just quickly want to check my my writings before, when you asked the questions, and what your expectations are basically. But I hope I touched mostly on it, and hand over to Christoph now.
Thank you, Johanna. Before delving into Iran, I would just like to respond to the question in the chat. Is there any preparation you expect from your travelers before the trips, or do you prepare the travelers in a certain way? So first of all, we always prepare quite a long preparation document that starts with practical advice and ends with the recommendations for literature, like from poems to like analysis to anything. So people have the opportunity to prepare themselves very, very well, but some don't, of course. And but further, we do always offer a physical, or nowadays quite often digital preparation meeting. It used to be physical. People, we met in Frankfurt or in Berlin or wherever with the people. But as we are aware that we have people who are quite busy working and they don't come prepared, we always take at least one full day to get to know a country after arriving, like from a theoretical perspective, or by just exchanging information within the group before we start meeting people and start visiting places. Okay, so Iran, a theo republic. So we have a very interesting setup in Iran. On the one hand, we do have democratic parts that are being under an umbrella of a republic. So we do have elections for parliament, for example. We do have elections for district parliaments and so on and so forth. We do have quite a lot of participation. But on the other hand, we have a religious authoritarian body that kind of lies over the republic. So, for example, it is Iranian theological persons, mullahs, ayatollahs, and so on, to decide whether a person can run as a candidate for parliament, to give you an example. And there is all these bodies, especially the so-called, what is it in English? Like the Wächterrat in German. So the, I need to look that up. Yeah. So we have a body that kind of decides who can run for parliament and who can run for presidency and so on and so forth. And a lot of progressive politicians are unfortunately very often being rejected with the arguments that they do not adhere to the religious principles of the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran. So that is one challenge, and we do have a state that is controlling its people quite a lot. And let's come to the next slide, please. So I think I made like, I give 3 very concrete strategies because we don't have much time. And but one thing you definitely need to do in such authoritarian regimes as Iran is to play by the rules. I mean by that, it makes sense to accept, for example, official invitations by religious scholars, as we have the case here with the Ayatollah, which is almost the highest ranking Shiite religious personality in Iran. And in that context, state television accompanied us. And so things like that you kind of need to do, in our view, in order to also kind of get the legitimacy by the state to travel in the country. So, and from our view, it also makes sense to listen to the official narrative and to reflect upon the official narrative afterwards in informal, safe spaces where we are amongst each other, for example, and where we can discuss why has, for example, the Islamic Republic of Iran such a critical view of Western countries such as the US, for example. And so it is very helpful in our view to kind of also have these official meetings in order to better understand the self-portrayal of a regime, be it authoritarian or not. And it's very telling the way also such a state self-portrays. And on the other hand, playing by the rules means we need to, in Iran, work with an officially certified travel agency. We need to give them a lot of information about participants, and it is up to us to be transparent on that with our participants, of course. And we've had people who decided against joining a tour after learning about all the information that we have to pass on, which is, of course, their right to do so. Next slide, please. In order to have like a comprehensive experience and really delve into critical issues, you need to be creative. So use informal spaces to have these critical discussions. For example, in a park, meet with an opposition activist in a park and not publish this appointment in your official program whatsoever, but just meet in a park and have 1 hour, because the Mukhabarat, the secret service of Iran, is not as fast, fortunately, to kind of intervene so fast. And the moment also, and you need to be very flexible, the moment you notice that, for example, there are bystanders which somehow seem to be distrustful, engage with them, speak with them, and ask them hi in a friendly way what they do. Another option is to, for example, go on hikes. That's why I chose the picture on the left, and use nature in order to be free to speak and Also, for example, as you know, women are forced to cover their hair in Iran, and it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, whosoever. So this is also one of the very few spheres where participants are able, you know, just to take the hijab off. And so informal spaces are very crucial in my view to hear also other perspectives. And for example, to join art festivals and speak with people while the music is loud is also an option. Next slide, please. And a third important pillar of our tours is definitely to reflect. Like the picture on the right, which is not very good, is we gathered in small groups and spoke about the experiences of the day, which are very diverse, and always choose like safe spaces to do so. Also in the bus, which on the one hand is the very much controlled part where they know where everyone sits, but when we are in the bus traveling from A to B, there is no one to listen. The only one to listen would be the travel guide, and the travel guide is so key, and therefore you should really for years kind of get to know such a person, because this person is the one to transport messages vis-a-vis the state, for example, and knows the boundaries best. And so it needs, yeah, you need to create a trust relationship. And therefore, for example, when we started our Iran tours, we gave like the responsibility to our colleague Sören, who had been living basically for 10 years in Iran and knew the tourism sector quite well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have started with Iran, because this place needs a lot of kind of precaution. And I'd like to conclude on that note, I think, and just give you some visual images. For example, we also do art tours, and art is a very interesting topic, because it really it's a way where boundaries are always being extended, or people try to extend them. And so participating in the main art festival of Iran every year is definitely a highlight. Maybe one more image. Yeah, diversity tours, be it natural diversity, religious diversities, and so on. And my last remarks would be, it is so important to do these tours in our view, and first of all, to create networks, so that if people get in danger, we can maybe also help them to reach a new, yeah, with regards to asylum issues, with regards to whatever support. Second, is so important that those people participating in such a trip kind of transmit that message to the people they know, and like the question of being a supplier to others, and to kind of transport a more differentiated message about the country, which is very much kind of kept to certain stereotypes, which are just not reflecting the reality.